Okay, so this is a very different style of video, if you haven't been able to tell already. I am reading off debates from my comment sections. I'm going to try to do this once a week. I am nervous. This will be great. I actually really love this debate. It went for like several days and it was really interesting. I was like, oh my goodness, this person has really good logic and is like phrasing these things so like respectfully. Having a respectful debate that's with everything thought out so deeply is really satisfying. I grew up doing debates all the time with my family. Like, my dad very much encouraged it so that we could understand our own beliefs better by explaining it and discussing it and having counterpoints thrown at us. We're like, wait, maybe you're right, but hold on, maybe let me explain my point a little bit better, you know? And so that's where these debates started. How do you prove that Jesus is the God? I said, good question. I'd say witness testimonies, archaeological evidence supporting everything physical in the Bible, even new things discovered after they were called into question. The Bible was written over the course of 1,500 years by over 40 different people in 3 different languages, and all share the same heart storyline. There are cross-references all throughout, making it the most historically accurate and consistent narrative in the world. It has been believed to the point of death by thousands of people who say they've witnessed miracles, and in my own life, I have experienced the freedom and peace that Christ gives me. They said, I appreciate your thoughtful response, but I wonder if we are confusing historical consistency with metaphysical truth. Does the fact that a text references real places or that its authors agreed with each other actually serve as proof for the supernatural nature of the central figure? We see martyrs in opposing religions who are equally willing to die for their beliefs, so we have to ask if sincerity is really a reliable gauge for objective reality. Even if we granted that a specific person performed miraculous feats, would that make them the timeless and uncaused foundation of reality, or merely a powerful being operating within time? We need to ask what it truly means to be the ultimate source of existence, because merely existing in history and doing wonderful things might not be enough to qualify as the absolute ground of being. Also, are we on the same page here? When you say God, are you referring to someone or something who is absolute ground of reality itself? Is that what we are talking about? I said, well, the thing is that Jesus didn't just perform wonderful feats in his time on earth. He fulfilled over 300 prophecies from the aforementioned 1,500-year range of writing. Has any other religion in history had that level of consistency and historical accuracy? No, especially not one somehow surviving so many attempts to destroy it over just the past 2,000 years. It is a text protected by God as he promised he would do. When I say God, I mean the creator of the universe, who calls everything into existence, and is the only reason that for so long people have read the text and understood it and protected it and agreed on its contents. Is there anything else in history that so many varieties of people and cultures have agreed on and witnessed miracles of healing and transformation from? They said, I appreciate your passion for the historical consistency and the fulfillment of prophecies, but strict adherence to a text or its survival over time is found in other major traditions as well, so that might not be the definitive proof of the ultimate reality we are looking for. You offered a profound definition of God as the creator who calls everything into existence, which is a philosophical cornerstone I think we can actually agree on. But that brings us to a difficult question regarding the nature of that existence. If a being is born at a specific point in time and undergoes changes like growth or suffering, does that not make him part of the creation rather than the sustainer of it? We need to determine if the one who is prophesied about and enters history is truly the necessary and uncaused source of all things, or if he is contingent upon that source just like the rest of us. I said, you ask good questions, I appreciate that. There is a level of faith to everything we believe. How would you prove your own existence if not for the footprints you make and the people you've interacted with? How would you prove wind exists? You don't see it, you can't capture it. You only see things reacting to it and feel it as it blows past you. So I ask you, do you exist? Does wind exist? And how do you prove it without your own logic calling it into question in the same way? They said, "Thank you for your kind words, and I genuinely appreciate your honest and logical engagement here, as it is rare to find such a thoughtful discussion. Your examples of wind and footprints perfectly illustrate how we perceive things inside the universe, through their effects, but there is a fundamental philosophical distinction we must make between things that exist dependently and the one who gives them existence. Wind is made of moving air and depends on atmospheric conditions just as I depend on biological processes. So we are both contingent beings that are caused by something else and are subject to change. This leads us to the logical conclusion that the ultimate source of all reality cannot be like the wind or a human because it must be the uncaused and unchanging foundation that makes those dependent things possible. If we are looking for the creator who calls everything into existence, shouldn't we be looking for a reality that transcends the limitations of time and change, rather than a being who is subject to them?" I said, "Anytime," about the, thank you. "If I know that God is God, then I believe his words when he says that Jesus is his son, and I believe when all the witnesses agree on what God declared. When Jesus came to earth, he laid down his glory in infinite being and came down to experience time and life how God designed it, to experience what we as people experience and still be perfect and without sin through it. He stepped down from infinity and stepped into the course of time. When he fulfilled everything he was supposed to and more, he returned to the Father and his infinite power, not contingent to the course of creation any longer. That is why he on earth responded to change and suffered, even though he as God was the ultimate creator." They said, "I see what you are saying about him laying down his glory and stepping into time, but this creates a paradox regarding the nature of the ultimate creator. If this being can undergo such a massive transition from infinite to finite and then back to infinite, this implies that his nature is subject to change and alteration. A truly necessary being that sustains the universe must be purely actual and unchanging, because if it changes, it means it has the potential to be different than it is, which suggests it is not the absolute bedrock of reality. If the creator can step down and modify his own existence to experience time, does that not mean he is reacting to the universe rather than being the immutable ground that the universe permanently depends upon?" I said, "He is the immutable ground, who is incomprehensible to humans. The universe can't change him, but he has power over his own self, and can take a third of his identity and make it finite for a time, because he has that much power over himself and everything else. It's impossible for us to comprehend in its fullness, which is why it takes a certain amount of faith, based on what he's shown us. But it's true, and he did it to build a bridge for our souls to join him in infinity. He built time and creation so that eventually our souls which can't die can rest it with him if we choose. He created us, but lets us choose where we want to spend eternity. There is a place eternally with him, and there is a place eternally without him. He won't force us to be with him, which is why we have this choice. That is what matters now in our finite lives. This is the time we have to make a choice, and one day when we die, our souls will enter eternity either with or without him. I pray that you have wisdom and peace in your life as you decide what to place your faith in, logic or God. Because this isn't just a debate to win. It's important. It's a logical discussion about faith and souls and reality itself. And so I'm not trying to win this debate, but, treat them as a person who is entitled to their own opinion and everything. They said, "I genuinely value your well wishes, and your explanation helps clarify your position. But it also highlights the exact philosophical difficulty I am wrestling with. When you speak of God taking a third of his identity or changing himself to become finite, does that not imply that the divine essence is composed of divisible parts? If the ultimate reality is made of fractions or parts, then it depends on those parts to exist, which would mean it is not the self-sufficient necessary existence we are seeking. Also, if God can change from infinite to finite, doesn't that suggest he possesses potentiality rather than being pure actuality? I do not see this as a choice between logic and God, but rather using the mind he gave us to ensure we are worshipping the truly unchanging one, rather than a composite being that changes with time. Which, yeah, makes complete sense. I appreciate their logic and everything, it's great. I said, that's an understandable dilemma. I wouldn't want to worship the wrong God. In my opinion, the fact that God tells us Jesus is his son, and gives us so much evidence surrounding it, is proof enough to at least consider the idea that Jesus could be the Son of God. God gives us minds and wants us to ask questions. I'm glad you're doing that, and I'm sure you'll find your answers somehow. I'd suggest asking God to give you undeniable proof and experience and understanding of who and how to worship. I know I found my answers. They said, I really appreciate your kind spirit and the suggestion to seek personal revelation, and since my understanding of Christian theology is limited, I want to ask you, as you are the expert, if it is true that your scriptures refer to God as the Logos, which I understand means the ultimate reason or logic, and he is the very standard of logic or reason itself, rather than just a subjective phenomenon we experience emotionally. If God is the ultimate logic, the Logos itself, as Christian scriptures call it, would it not follow that his nature must be perfectly coherent, consistent, and free from contradiction, rather than something we must accept despite logical absurdities and contradictions like a square circle or a changing, unchangeable being? This brings us back to the problem, because if the Creator is the necessary foundation of reality, he must be the necessary existence that defines logic itself, rather than a being who violates it by becoming finite. Shouldn't we expect the true God to be the perfection of reason that our minds can discover through necessity, rather than a mystery that requires us to abandon logic to believe, relying solely on subjective experience? I said, that's a good point. I was considering that earlier. There is logic to it, but no one understands the inner workings of creation. God has a logic we don't always understand, but he does, and as the creator, it's a good thing he knows what he's doing. Do you expect to be able to understand the inner working of the infinite creator when we as humans cannot even comprehend creation? They said, I completely agree that the full essence of the Creator is beyond our limited grasp, just as a cup cannot hold the ocean. In fact, we don't even fully understand things like DNA or dark matter, or quantum gravity or black holes, just like you said it. We cannot even comprehend the creation, so how can we expect to comprehend the Creator? I agree with you 100%. It even has a term, super-rational, something that is beyond our understanding. But this is not what I'm talking about. There is a crucial distinction between something being super-rational, beyond our full understanding, like the complexity of the cosmos, and irrational, contradictory to reason, like a married bachelor or a square circle. These two are totally different things. I'm talking about the irrational part. We aren't expecting to dissect the Creator's inner thoughts, we simply can't. But we must be able to define his fundamental nature as the necessary existence, because truth cannot contradict itself. Think about it. We can see this distinction even in something as simple as pi. We can define pi with absolute precision as the ratio of a circle's circumference to its diameter. That definition is exact and coherent, yet we cannot ever write out its full value in a finite list of digits. That's the super-rational part. Its nature is perfectly well defined, but its complete numerical expansion exceeds what our finite minds and finite notation can exhaust. So pi is not vague or contradictory, only inexhaustible. In the same way, saying that the Creator's full depth is beyond us does not excuse logical contradictions. Being unable to capture the totality of something does not mean we abandon the requirement that its basic nature be coherent. If the ultimate reality is truly the uncaused cause, as Aristotle defined, then by definition it cannot undergo change or division, because change implies a move from potential to actual, which would mean he wasn't fully perfect to begin with. To say the infinite became finite isn't a deep mystery we can't grasp. It is a logical and direct contradiction that negates and undermines the very definition of a necessary being itself. If the divine is truly the necessary existence, the Logos, and the source of all reason, then he'd not only not be something contradictory as a squared circle, a changeable, unchangeable being, but also would not expect us to embrace a definition of himself that violates the very logic he grounds as the perfection of coherence itself. I said, is what Aristotle said a fundamental law of the universe, or is it him trying to explain the unexplainable? I believe that God is the creator, the foundation, and the logos. The Trinity is a difficult subject to comprehend because how can something be three separate things at once but also one infinite being? I believe that God the Father is the creator and source of and logic of the universe. Christ the Son is the physical incarnation, the visible image of the invisible God, quoting Colossians 1:15. The Holy Spirit is what dwells in us, teaching and guiding here on earth. The logic of the Trinity is just like the logic of a human. We have a mind, a body, and a soul, all three at the same time, and yet only one identity. So does God. He made a physical representation of himself who was there with him at the beginning, and put Christ on earth in a physical body that was able to be affected by the laws of creation. Christ's soul was still infinite inside of him, just as our souls are infinite inside us. But Christ was with God in the beginning and outside of time before we were created. He was placed in a body, but God the Father was still infinite in heaven and all around us, the constant ground of reality. That part of himself never left its place because he is so infinite that he is simply everywhere no matter where or what he does. He stayed there being the foundation and being infinite without comprehensible description. But Christ came into the world, and God told us he was who he said he was. We may not be able to understand how God can be infinite and finite at the same time, but he says, do not overlook this one fact, beloved, that with the Lord 1 day is as 1,000 years, and 1,000 years as 1 day. It is not the same ground of understanding that we use on earth, but God gave us so much evidence of everything that was stated in the Bible leading up to Christ, and Christ fulfilling every single thing and more. It is impossible for it to be a coincidence, as there is just too much proof and information surrounding it all. The Bible is the most reliable piece of literature ever, and is still affecting people more than 2,000 years later. I don't know if you've ever read it, but there is a power to its words. It is a supernatural book, proving without a doubt everything that can be proved. We may not understand the nature of God, and how he can be finite but infinite at the same time, but we can see that he has proved without a doubt everything surrounding it, more than anything else can even be proved, and he still performs miracles today. I appreciate your questions, they've made me think, but we will never fully comprehend the concept of God's being. I see what can be proved, and how much it has been proved completely accurate in comparison to everything else we believe from history, and I believe. Our understanding of how the universe works may be very, very flawed. Therefore, it does not mean that God is imperfect or illogical when he does not exist within the guidelines we think are the foundation of everything, or the guidelines of how we perceive things to be understood. A square circle may not make sense with how we perceive squares and circles to be, and the rules we gave to their structure based on what we can observe, but in a world without arbitrary dimensions, a world incomprehensible to the human mind, they could be one and the same. The distinction between the two might not be as arbitrary or important as we perceive it to be. I don't know if that makes any sense to you, but that is why I said logic or God, because God has logic, but it is not the same process as how we arbitrarily assign rules to the universe and change the rules we teach and practice as we discover more. People used to think the earth was flat, but then they discovered it was not, and it changed all understanding of previous logic on how earth and the sky coexist. There could be something we are not seeing, something we are not understanding in our way of arbitrarily perceiving things, but we cannot see the full picture as God can. We see the ground and the horizon from where we stand, but God sees and knows all. They said, I appreciate the time you took to write this, and I feel we have arrived at the critical juncture of the debate regarding the nature of truth itself. YouTube is not allowing me to post this in one part, so I'll have to post in 2 parts. When you suggest that a square circle might actually exist in a higher dimension, and that logic is just an arbitrary rule like the earth is flat, you are conflating empirical knowledge, which changes as we learn more facts, with logical necessity, which is true by definition. Empirical knowledge evolves with time, and our models of the world improve as our observations sharpen. Newton described gravity one way, Einstein later refined it, and future physicists may refine it further, but none of that ever touched the fundamental truths that cannot shift. 2 + 2 has always equaled 4, no matter who observed it or when. If you place 2 objects in a container and then add 2 more, the total is 4 and has been 4 since the beginning of everything that can be counted. The same applies to the value of pi and to the Pythagorean theorem. These truths do not change because they cannot change, not because God lacks the power to alter them, but because altering them would collapse the very possibility of truth. A world where such fundamentals could be broken is a world where nothing could be known at all. The shape of the earth was a mistake of observation, but a square circle is a contradiction in terms. A square has corners and a circle does not. If God can force them to be the same, then he can also make good equal evil, or existence equal non-existence, or 2 + 2 = 5, at which point the word truth loses all meaning. That's the biggest problem. When I say that a squared circle or a changing yet unchangeable being is impossible, I am not appealing to human incomprehension, but to the very structure of truth itself. There is a difference between something that is super-rational, meaning it surpasses the grasp of a finite mind, and something that is irrational, meaning that it contradicts the foundations of coherence. An infinite being is obviously super-rational to us and cannot be fully understood by a finite creature, but that is not what I'm talking about. The issue is that an irrational proposition destroys the very possibility of truth. If 2 + 2 suddenly equaled 5, the entire fabric of mathematics would collapse because the basic axioms that ground every logical relation would be shattered. There would be no geometry, no physics, no consistency, and no universe in any meaningful sense. In the same way, asking us to accept a squared circle or a mutable, immutable being is not asking us to rise above our limits, but to embrace a direct violation of logic that would annihilate meaning itself. Furthermore, your analogy of the human mind, body, soul is actually my main concern. You said the logic of the Trinity is just like the logic of a human. We have a mind, a body, and a soul, all at the same time, yet only one identity. So does the Christian God. I agree with you completely, and that is precisely my point. A human being is a contingent being, and the very composition you refer to is further proof of that contingency. We are composite beings, which is what makes us finite rather than infinite, contingent rather than necessary. By definition, something that is finite and contingent cannot be a necessary being, and a truly necessary being must not have any composing parts in the first place. A human is a composite being made of parts, and anything made of parts is dependent on those parts to exist, whereas the necessary existence must be simple, indivisible, and one, to be the ultimate foundation of reality by the very definition. If the Creator is composed of parts like a human, or can violate the basic laws of logic, are we not describing a powerful, complex creature within the universe, rather than the absolute, simple, and necessary ground of being that sustains logic itself? I said, how do we know that the universe is contingent on an immutable singular being rather than a trinity who relies on itself and its roles to support all existence? Because a man thought of it one day and it made sense to him and others as far as we understand? I came across a meme this morning that I think describes my point well. I'll put that on the screen. Why do we believe what man decides as the ultimate truth and rules for the structure of reality, rather than the Creator as the ultimate reality and structure? It may seem illogical, but it's a valid belief system if we consider God the structure of the universe, rather than what a man thought one day while pondering. That made me think so much, and I really enjoyed that discussion. I don't know if I could have explained things better or not, but I really enjoyed that. Explaining it really helped me to be able to understand my own understanding of logic itself. The way I was living my life was as God and the Bible were not the foundation of logic and the ultimate truth, the ultimate foundation of how we should live our lives. I was reading the Bible and reading certain parts of it as, I don't know about that, but it's the Word of God, the most proved text in all of history. Every single thing in there is completely logical to the very foundation. And so everything in the Bible, to its very foundation, is truth and what we should be building our lives upon. Since that discussion, I I've really been readjusting my priorities, or at least trying to. This is why I love debates. Because I understand my own logic and my own faith so much deeper than I did before that discussion. So, yeah. If you guys want to have a debate like this, no matter what the subject is, I would love that, as long as we're staying mature and reasonable and not taking low hits or anything like that. Staying logical in a debate and explaining the best we can. Even if we disagree, there's still that respect there. And I just love that. There's that mutual respect in that discussion that I love. And we're gonna continue that debate, or a debate at some point. I can't wait. I love debates, and this will be a series, hopefully weekly. Just finished editing that. See you guys next time. I post reels daily.